This podcast is brought to you by Blackaby Ministries International. To find out more, visit blackaby.org.
Well, thank you, everyone, for listening to the Richard Blackaby Leadership Podcast, helping take your leadership to the next level. My name is Sam, and I'm joined by Richard Blackaby.
Always good to be with you, Sam.
It's always a pleasure. We were just talking before we hit record that the Buffalo Sabres, they're still trucking along?
It's trucking, yeah. What's the update
there?
It's a beat-up old pickup, but they're trucking. Yeah, they're still trying to work it out. I tell you what, it's in sports of all kinds. It's amazing how you could be almost unbeatable one week and then just look like the worst team in the league the next. So
yeah, there's certainly never a dull moment. It seems like for the Sabres.
No, but moving on.
Yeah. Well, speaking of hockey, we talked about this last. Well, we were planning to talk about it last podcast, but I actually forgot. You met somewhat of a hockey legend in Canada when you were in Toronto recently.
Yeah, and of course, I'm something of a hockey legend in my own mind as well. But
I mean, another hockey legend.
Another one. Actually, I was actually speaking in Toronto last week and was in a meeting with Paul Henderson, and anyone of my vintage will always remember Paul Henderson scoring the winning goal that won the Team Canada, the 1972 series against the Russians. And on many levels, that was just an amazing tournament. It was, of course, one of the very first tournaments where North Americans were playing against the Russians, the Soviets, and when the wall was still up and as foreboding as ever. But so it wasn't something that was done, and the Russians used all kinds of tricks. They were very dirty players back then. They would jab you with their stick or do something kind of dirty that the ref didn't see, and then these Canadians would just drop the gloves like, okay, we're gonna have a fight, and the next thing they knew, they were in the penalty box, and the Russians were on a power play, and they got in our head, and the refs were notoriously biased in what they called or didn't call, and so. Before very long, what we thought was going to be a cakewalk, we're down a couple of games and in danger of being embarrassed by these supposedly unprofessional Russian players that are beating the best players in hockey in North America. But we went to Russia for the second set of 4 games, and even with biased reffing and everything else, they were bugging the hotel rooms and all kinds of crazy stuff going on. But we got to the point where in that 8-game series, we had to win the last 3 games if we were going to win the tournament. We were down that bad. And we won all 3. And Paul Henderson actually scored the winning goal, I believe, in all 3 of the final games. And so when he scored that winning goal, I remember because the games were in Russia, they were actually televising them in the middle of the afternoon in North America in the morning. And I was going to public school at the time. And the school actually brought in TVs, and we just didn't even have class. Everybody went into the gymnasium or the library, and we all watched the game. And I had only moved to Canada 2 years earlier than that, and I sort of marked that as when I truly became Canadian at heart, because you're watching this Team Canada coming back, and in just the dying minutes, Canada scores the winning goal, and everybody is hugging. Principals are hugging students and teachers, and we're celebrating. And it was truly, I think they say, perhaps close to 90% of everyone in Canada was watching that Game 8, which is just amazing.
That's incredible.
So, I was speaking, and Henderson was there, and he came up as soon as I finished and wanted to meet me. And I'm like, hey, you're my hero. I want to meet you. And so we did a selfie, and since that tournament, he became a Christian and actually has led a wonderful men's ministry that's spread all over North America. And now he's almost 78 years old now, but still he's battling cancer. So if you think about it and you remember him, you might just pray for him. But really upbeat guy, really positive, and he would tell you, certainly at that point, he was the most famous, greatest hero in all of Canada, but he would tell you even the more significant for him was when he found Christ and how God changed his life. So anyway, when you see some of these guys you've always idolized as a boy, and then he's coming up saying he wants to meet you. It's like, wow, I've just died and gone to hockey heaven here.
Yeah. Well, what an incredible connection.
Yeah.
And speaking of connections.
Oh, nice
Did you see what I did there?
You're getting better at that, Sam.
It's just amaze myself sometimes. We did not we're not doing a podcast on hockey and the finer points therein.
At least not yet. But
not yet.
It might be coming.
I'm sure it's
if Buffalo turns things around, we may have to do one.
It's just a sketch right now, but it may come to fruition. But no, today we want to look at what you're calling divine connections.
Yeah.
And so I just wonder if you could unpack that a little bit for us.
Yeah, well, I've read a lot of biographies. We've highlighted a lot of those on this podcast, and even when you look at the most famous leaders, whether they're business, military, a guy like J.P. Morgan, John Rockefeller, Henry Ford, Steve Jobs, obviously gifted, driven people in their own right, but you never have to look very far to find that. Every solitary one of them had some key lieutenants that either made significant discoveries, they solved a problem, they knew things that these primary guys didn't know that helped them be successful. Mm-hmm. And even the most talented, whether it's Steve Jobs or whatever else, Jobs was not necessarily an inventor. He just knew how to perfect things that other people had done. But he needed those other people to do the legwork and the hard engineering and so on. He could look and see stylistically, how do we want to package this or whatever. But he couldn't have ever done it. He could never build Apple unless he had key people with him.
Yeah.
And so what I realized as I was looking at that, I realized the most successful people are the ones who know how to tap into the talents and abilities and knowledge of others.
Yeah.
And if you don't know how to do that, if you're just a lone ranger who just is going through business, going through leadership, pastoring a church, whatever else, just strictly on your own ability, what you know, what you were trained to do, you're going to get to the end of yourself inevitably, and you're going to put a limit to what you do. But if you know how to tap into the skills and abilities of others, then there is no limit to what you can do. You can always pull in other people and learn more and bring in new skills, new insights that you didn't have that lets you go further. And so the key, I think, for this, I'm calling it divine connections, because what I would suggest to you is that right now, if you were to do an audit of the people that God has placed around your life, I mean, it could be someone on your staff right now, could be someone who goes to the same church you go to, might be someone that's in a similar industry, that is at a company in the same building you're in. Maybe they're just a Christian businessman or businesswoman in your same city that you've heard about, you know about, but someone that's accessible to you if you were to reach out to them. That more than likely, whatever problem that you are experiencing right now, God has probably put someone with the answer to your problem within your reach. You may not even know them yet. You may just know of them. But the issue I want to address today is, if you're struggling in some area right now of your leadership, more than likely there's someone that could help you that is within reach. The question is, are you going to access them? Are you going to reach out? Have you built a personal network with such people so that you can get the help when you need it?
Yeah, that's really powerful. And I think so many of us will go through whatever social things we go to, whether it's, just a club, if it's church, if it's work, if it's sporting, whatever. And we often don't really get to know those people around us.
Yeah.
And I think when we do, we're really surprised that, you're involved in this or you do this. And that's really fascinating because, I'm having a problem with that, or that is right up my alley, so to speak. And we just never really unlock that potential that's just within arm's reach of our network. And I wonder, I think you've got a good example lined up for us in Scripture of what does this look like, and the potential for someone to really unlock the power of the network around them.
Yeah, I was reading through Genesis recently, and I was in chapter 40, and, sometimes you read these well-known stories, and all of a sudden something strikes you that you hadn't noticed before. And in Genesis 40, you kind of hit the low point in Joseph's life. He has been betrayed, sold into slavery by his brothers. that certainly was a low. And then he worked for Potiphar, captain of the guard for Pharaoh, and he works really hard. He's diligent, responsible, but then Potiphar's wife makes a pass at him. He does all the right things. He flees the temptation. He doesn't succumb. He wants to honor his boss, but then he's lied about, and he ends up in jail. At that point, you'd think, okay, I've done nothing wrong, but here I am in jail. And so I've got a choice to make. I can either just wallow in self-pity and complain about how unfair life is, or I can make the best of where I am at the moment. And so that's what Joseph does. And before long, the chief jailer puts him in charge of everything. And so one day, of course, we a lot of us have heard these stories from childhood, but Pharaoh gets unhappy with his baker and his butler, and he puts them both in jail. And so one day, in fact, verse 7, Joseph sees these two royal servants in jail, and he says, why do you look so sad today? Which I just intrigues me, because here's a guy who's had nothing but unfairness, and he's in jail for as long as as best he knows, the rest of his life. He's not even 30 years old yet, and he's in jail in his 20s at this point. But he's upbeat. He reaches out to these new people, basically to get to know them. He could have just sullenly just ignored the new prisoners, but he goes and meets them. He says, he's upbeat, he's smiling, he's trying to be encouraging. Why are you upset? And they, of course, both tell him, Pharaoh sent us both here, and so on. And then they've each had a dream, and Joseph interprets the dream for both of them. And then when he finishes with the telling them their dream, he says to both of them, he says, but in verse 14, but remember me when it is well with you. And so basically, especially to the butler that he's told would soon be serving the Pharaoh again, he says, just don't forget me, which is very interesting, because what Joseph is doing is he's networking in jail. Yeah. And you would think, now, if you think about it, if you were sent to jail unfairly and you're hanging out with other convicts, you're probably not going to be thinking, boy, I can probably make some great business contacts here. I need to really network while I'm here.
You can, but likely those business contacts will you'll circle back and you'll be right back where you started. But Joseph just had, and see, the thing that's interesting to me, I was thinking about this. If he's in jail and he's thinking, how am I ever going to get out of here? What he's probably what I would have thought is, well, Potiphar is my best guess, because he's the captain of the bodyguard, and I served him really well. And maybe his wife, if I keep pressing, if I stay with him, eventually maybe his wife will confess that she lied. It's not true, and because or if his wife did that to him, she's probably going to do that to somebody else. Yeah, and eventually.
You just think that, but that guy is well connected. He's not in jail. He's still out and about working with Pharaoh. So the odds are pretty good. If any contact of mine is going to get me out of jail, it's probably going to be Potiphar. Yeah. But of course he never does. You never really hear of him again. But instead, here's a guy that's been thrown in jail, a butler, but Joseph just has a way of just being pleasant, being upbeat around whoever it is he's working with at the time, whoever he's meeting, and he just keeps on saying, just remember me. Now, Potiphar doesn't remember him, or if he does, it doesn't do him any good. The baker might have remembered him, but he ends up being executed for his crime, so it doesn't do Joseph any good. But this butler, and the butler himself forgets Joseph for 2 years. So 2 years goes by, and Joseph could easily have said to himself, what a wasted contact. Here I took time to take down all of his contact information. He promised me he'd, link up with me on LinkedIn and so on. But I've never heard from him. I've never gotten any referrals from him. It looks like another dead end. And then 2 years later, all of a sudden, when Pharaoh's having a birthday and he has a troubled dream one night, the guy remembers. And so by remembering Joseph gets up one morning in jail, just like he had for the last couple of years. All of a sudden, one of his contacts he's never heard back from remembers him, mentions him to Pharaoh. Pharaoh sends some people to get Joseph out of jail. They shave him, clean him up, dress him up, and have him standing before Pharaoh later that day. And what that goes to show you is just how quickly one contact at the right moment, at the right time, can change everything in your life. You start out assuming you're going to put another day in maximum security prison.
Yeah.
And the next thing you know, you're standing before the king and being made the second highest government official in the land. And that's the power of divine connections. And so Joseph is an interesting study for me, because it doesn't mean every connection you make is going to pan out. It doesn't mean that you're going to always be remembered, but you don't know which ones will remember you and at what time they might remember you and when you might need that person. You might never need that contact, but you made it, but you don't know which contacts you'll need, which ones will have something that can be helpful to you later. The key is just networking. The key is just getting to know people and letting them know who you are. And I'm not talking about sort of a, glad handing kind of guys who we all sort of know, those kind of people that work the room. They go to a Christmas party and they're handing out their business cards to everybody, and just being kind of annoying by being this big man on campus that wants everybody to know who they are and attention-seeking kind of person. I'm not talking about those kind of people. I'm just talking about when you show up, just keep your spiritual eyes open. And get to know people and ask questions about them and meet them, let them know who you are. And it just might be that a particular need you have, you may not even have that need today, but you may have a need a month from now. And it just so happens that at that Christmas party, you met someone that just mentioned that they do that kind of work. That's exactly what you need. And so Joseph, of all things, networks in a maximum security prison, and it ends up putting him as the number 2 man in the entire country.
That's just it's a pretty amazing study to look at his life, and for so many reasons, and especially in the area of connections. Let's take a quick break here, and we've got a few more things we want to sort of suss out.
Whether at home, on the job, or in the ministry, we can all have a greater impact on the world around us for the kingdom of God. Join Richard Blackaby at the Billy Graham Training Center at the Cove to learn about increasing your spiritual influence on April 6th through the 8th, 2020. Space is limited, so register soon at the link in the show notes.
Richard, I love that story of Joseph that we looked at just before the break, and not only his attitude in difficult situations, but also his ability to connect with people, and we saw how he was actually serving those 2 servants of Pharaoh who were sent in prison, and turns out that served him later on.
Yeah.
I guess to bring this home to our listeners and to us, why do so many people not recognize those connections and not develop those more often? Because as you say, I mean, I think anyone listening could maybe look through their phone or look on their social media and say, I actually do have some pretty good connections.
Yeah.
And what are you doing about it? And so,
well, lots to say about that. One is just, and I think you make a good point. Joseph, the first time Joseph meets those guys, he's actually encouraging them.
Yeah.
They're discouraged, and then he actually interprets their dreams for them. So I know these kind of people that it's just like they're looking for a sale. They're looking to do business with you. They want you to help them. And
right.
And you sort of get to know those people. They're kind of working the crowd looking for what they can get.
Right.
And if you don't, I'm not encouraging you to be that kind of person. Joseph was the kind of guy that the first 2 times he encountered these guys, he's blessing them. When the butler leaves the jail, he's not done a thing for Joseph. All he's done is receive from Joseph. But because Joseph blessed him and helped him and gave him what he needed, 2 years later, the guy's going to finally reciprocate for him. So be careful you don't just have your hands out all the time saying, what can I get from everybody?
Right.
But at the same time, recognize when your path crosses someone that perhaps mutually you can help each other at some point. But the point you make is something that just really bothers me at times, because I just see so many people struggling individually when there are resources. There are people that God's put around them. I see that a lot with pastors. I can't tell you how many pastors will be discouraged, ready to quit. They've tried what they can. They can't turn their church around. They have all kinds of problems and opposition. But there may be a dozen other pastors in their denomination that all are nearby in the same city, And some of these pastors may have been at it for 30, 40 years and have dealt with all the same issues, may even know some of the same people.
Yeah.
But these discouraged pastors will not reach out. They will not reach out to a fellow pastor and say, hey, listen, could we do lunch? I've been going through a real tough time. I just love to bounce some things off of you. And literally there's pastors who'd rather just quit and end their ministry than just ask for help.
I think that says something too, just about the weight of discouragement as well.
Yeah.
Is that's I think something that if you get discouraged, the last thing a lot of times you want to do is ask for help, and that you start to insulate yourself.
Yeah, and insulation is the kiss of death. You know, basically, because that's what we tend to do. We withdraw. We're embarrassed. Here, this guy seems to be having so much success at the very thing I'm struggling with or failing at. So, last thing I want to do is tell him what a loser I am. That I don't know how to do that. And so we don't learn anything. And this guy was at the very same place we were a few years earlier, but they got answers, they worked it through, and they've got some wisdom now that they'd be glad to share with you if you just reached out. You know, I've mentioned this before, but parenting is a huge one, you know.
Yeah.
And that just applies to everybody. And I mean, every parent at some point is going to struggle with kids, maybe is when they're teenagers or at some point in school or with bullies or peer pressure, or they're starting to not want to go to church. What do I do? I mean, parents face all those kind of issues, and in your church, in your workplace, there are just all kinds of people who've been down that road already. And they've got some wisdom. They've helped their kids work it through. And I for the life of me, I don't know why other Christian parents won't just ask for help and just say, hey, you've got teenagers. They all seem to be doing great. Like, could I take you to lunch and just ask you, how did you navigate your kids through their teenage years where they still love Jesus at the other end, and that they love you still as their parents? And I mean, why would you not? Why would you let your kids keep struggling when there's people that you have access to if you just ask? Now, most parents worth their salt are not going to come to you and say, hey, it looks like you're struggling right now with your kids. I'd love to, mentor you. They're not going to approach you.
And you probably don't want their advice.
Right. The ones who do offer advice usually aren't the ones you want.
Yeah.
It could be a young couple or even an older couple, but you're facing a financial decision. You're trying to decide about maybe a real estate issue, investment issue, and it's a huge issue that's going to affect your future. And so many people just try to use the internet, or they just make their best guess. And there might be a guy who's a financial advisor that would be glad just to help you, walk with you, or that's been down that road. And they did all the research just 2 years earlier. And there's all kinds of people that God may have put all around you that have answers that could help you.
Yeah.
But if you aren't connected to them, you're not going to get the help that God's made available to you.
Yeah, and I think we see this all the time, and I think even in our own lives we have a bit of this as well. It's just the idea that you just have to sort of figure it out for yourself. That you don't ask for help from anyone. So maybe in closing, what would you say to folks who maybe are experiencing a difficulty or a crisis or an issue, and they're just not sure who to turn to? How would you go about cultivating those connections? As you say, not in this sort of, let me give you my business card and how can you help me sort of way.
Yeah.
But genuinely connect with those who are immediately around them.
Yeah. Well, I think there's some things that just hold people back. And let me just mention 4 things that I think prevent people from making those connections. One, as we already mentioned, is just pride. You just get your pride aside and say, look, I'd rather my business, my church, my family was successful. That's more important to me than my ego that someone might know that I need help. Even the most successful business leaders, military leaders out there, they knew how to access what they didn't have themselves from other people. And that's not called humility. I mean, look at you, you need help. It's called wisdom. It means you're smart enough to know that there's things you don't know. And so I'm going to find someone that does have the answers, and I'm going to get it. And I'm not going to waste time. I'm not going to spin my wheels for 5 years trying to figure out answers that I could have gotten over a lunch meeting if I just humbled myself and reached out to someone.
Yeah.
So get your pride out of the way. Another is some people just don't cultivate networks. They just don't bother to meet people. They don't keep their eyes open. So they don't, and sometimes we don't have the need today. So we think, well, yeah, that guy's a financial guru, but right now I don't have any money to invest. So why get to know him? Well, 5 years later, your aunt dies and leaves you some money, and now you've got no one to help you know how to wisely invest that because you didn't bother to take time to build a network. So whether you think you have a need or not, right now, you may well have the need later. So get to know people. Keep up with their contacts. Seek to be a blessing to people. As you know, be a delightful person. I just keep thinking of Joseph. These two guys have just hit rock bottom in jail, and here comes this smiling Joseph saying, "Why are you downcast? Hey, let me encourage you." Those are the kind of guys you remember later, and that you tend to want to help yourself when you have the chance. And third, especially for Americans and North Americans, we tend to be very independent-minded. We're the kind of the cowboy that just rides off on his horse alone, and he'll just face whatever danger with him and his six gun.
As long as he's got his bootstraps, he can.
Yeah, and we get this sort of mentality: you're not a real man, or you're not really successful, or you're not a good leader if you have to actually ask for help and if you have to rely upon others. But in this very networked society in which we live now, all of our expertise and various industries are dependent upon others and what they do. We're all interconnected, and so there's nothing humbling about that. It's just reality. It's just wisdom to recognize that and to say, okay, I'm good at certain things. I know certain things. It's not like I'm completely clueless, but I don't know all I need to know about that. I don't have all the skills I need for this, and so let me find and just build into my network people that are really good at that. It's like I find when I move into a new community. When I moved to Atlanta several years ago, you got to get network. I got to find a mechanic because I'm not going to fix my own car. And who's a mechanic I can trust and that will charge me a fair price and won't gouge me and lie to me. And I got to get a doctor that I connect with. I need a dentist. I've got to get an accountant that helps me with some stuff. And so, you just build slowly a network of people who have expertise that you need so that whatever comes along, you've got someone you can call, that you've got a relationship with someone. So be working at that. Build up a network around you and around your company, around your church, that when issues arise, you're not just flailing about saying, I've had people say to me, well, Richard, I did everything I knew to do. Yeah. And I failed. And I would say, well, the problem is you didn't know everything that you needed to know.
Right.
Your problem is you limited all of your response to the problem to what you knew, not on what your network knew. Your network knows a lot more than you know.
That's
so
right.
Build a strong network, and you'll be far more knowledge and skill available. And the last is just sometimes people are just sort of stoic and they're just content. Okay, I've got all three of my kids are now drug addicts and in trouble with the law, but I guess that's just kids will be kids, Yeah. I'd say, no, I don't think that I had to resign myself to that. I think if I'd gotten help, if I'd gotten advice, there could have been some things I could have done to intervene, to change things. Maybe my business could have done better if I had actually networked with some other business guys. In Toronto, was just doing a conference for a lot of Christian business leaders, and those conferences can be great because they built in time just to meet people in those conferences because they realize it's not just what you hear from the lecture, the plenary session that people are giving, but it's the people you meet during the coffee break. And so don't just sit there at your table and check your emails.
Yeah.
Go get a Nanaimo bar and some coffee and meet somebody. And it might be that the whole point of going to this conference today, you won't learn a thing in the lectures that makes any difference. But the guy you were getting coffee with at the same time, you exchange cards, and a month later you're going to realize that's the very guy you need.
You know, to that point, I was just speaking with someone a few days ago about our most recent coaching workshop, which happened at the beginning of November, and we just got to talking about how it so often is the case that, I mean, you learn good stuff from the teachers at the workshop, but almost without fail, every single one of those workshops, the connections that these people make and learning from each other seems to be the thing that continues to stand out to those who attend. And it's just incredible. So,
you know, every time I go to a meeting, it might be just at your church. It could be at a something for your industry, and you go to this meeting for a day, a seminar or something. I tend just to look around the room and ask myself the question, is there a divine appointment here today? Is there someone I need to meet today that will have answers I need tomorrow? And so let me just leave you with that question. Take time to audit the relationships, the network that God has given you, the people that are in your orbit. Do they have some answers to some problems you're facing right now? And are you accessing them, or are you trying to face all the problems on your own? There's no reward for saying, I solved the whole problem myself. I didn't ask for any help. There's no bonus for that. Right. The reward is saying, boy, I tell you what, I searched the network up and down. I looked for all the wisdom I could find from wherever I could find it, so I could bring the very best answers to the problem that my company, my church, my family is facing. And so if you don't have a network, if you've neglected that, it's never too late to start just saying, well, look around. And you don't have to go far, and you'll realize that within arm's reach right now, the very people you need with the answers you need are around you if you'll just access them.
Well, I think I couldn't have ended it better myself, and we'll talk to you next time.
Thanks for listening to the podcast. If this is something you enjoyed, it really makes a difference if you leave a review and a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen. Don't forget to subscribe and share with your friends. We always love hearing from our listeners, so email us at podcast@blackaby.org.